Jordan, it's great to interview you again. I interviewed you back in October last year, and then I've now made 2 documentaries about you. And a big focus for Rebel Wisdom is kind of making sense of the cultural moment and making sense of your success and what it represents. And I don't know if you remember, but the very first question I asked you back in October in the interview was, firstly, what do you make of your success so far, and are you ready for it to continue? Because I had a sense back then that what your message represented was something the culture desperately needed. The sort of, and what that signifies to me is a kind of reintegration of the sacred. Did you have any sense back then the exponential success that you were going to have between then and now?
Well, I mean, the most likely outcome at each of the, what would you say, at each point where I might notice what's going on around me has been that this will stop. But it isn't stopping. So I've been thinking about that pretty much non-stop, I would say. And I have some solutions, let's say, or some ideas that I didn't present in October. So one of the things I've realized is that part of what's accounting for the popularity of my ideas is actually a secondary consequence of a technological revolution. And I've seen that more clearly since October, partly because I can see the mainstream media dying at a faster and faster rate, and the alternative media expanding faster and faster. So television, radio, and the classic print media had shared one thing in common, which was an extreme restriction in bandwidth. This was especially true of television, because each minute of television, given the necessity to broadcast and the expense of that, was unbelievably expensive. And so there just wasn't time to do anything on television. There's no time. And so if you had something important to say, or even something unimportant for that matter, most of the time it had to be compressed into something approximating 30 seconds, which wouldn't even be your words. It would be a journalist commenting on what you said. And if you were really pushing the envelope, maybe you'd have 25 minutes on a talk show that was devoted to your ideas. But then even that would be highly scripted. And so television made people look stupider than they were, even to the producers of television, because of this narrow bandwidth. The rise of video online, and audio as well, has blown the bandwidth limitation out of our mass communication. And it turns out that people are smarter with longer attention spans than we thought. What happened with me was that, for one reason or another, I was an early adopter of that technology. And so there's this massive technological transformation, which is a Gutenberg revolution in the provision of video and audio. No barrier to production, because it doesn't cost anything. Anyone can do it. People can communicate with it. You can cut up YouTube videos. You can make your documentaries. The entry point is easy. Audio podcasts and that sort of thing, which can be of indefinite length, allow people to use found time to listen. More people can listen than can read. Like, all of these things add up to a massive technological revolution. And it's that upswell in technology that's in part has propelled what I've been doing to this mass audience. And so that's been a relief to figure that out, because it depersonalizes it to some degree, right? And so I use the metaphor, when I've been asked about this before, of being on a wave. I'm surfing on a giant wave, but the wave isn't something that I've done. It's part of this technological revolution. So that's a relief to know that. And I'm quite convinced that that's the case. Because there are other people who are occupying the same space, essentially. Joe Rogan is a very good example of that. And the various commentators on YouTube who've become increasingly influential and powerful. Same thing. Driven by the technology, they happen to be early adopters. And then there's a secondary question, which is, well, is there anything specific in relationship to my content, let's say. And I would say also that is the case. And I think what I've been able to do with reasonable effectiveness is to draw a conceptual equivalence between the meaning that's necessary to sustain you in life, given its suffering and malevolence, and the necessity to adopt responsibility. And I think there's something new about that. I mean, I don't know how new. I'm sure I'm not the first person who's discovered that, but I think I've done a reasonable job of pointing out to people that the suffering that's intrinsic to life in the absence of meaning is not tolerable. It destroys and corrupts. And that the proper pathway out of that isn't rights or happiness or entitlement or anything that's associated with individual ease, let's say, but with the adoption of something approximating maximal responsibility. And people get that. Like it's not that hard to understand when it's laid out like that. And lots of people, especially young people, especially people who are young and also somewhat nihilistic in their orientation, perhaps because of an excess of intellectual criticism, they grab that immediately and think, oh, there's the missing piece. I see. It's that the antidote to this meaninglessness, this void that I'm confronting, isn't hedonism. It's not rights. It's not impulsive pleasure. It's none of that. It's responsibility. It's like, oh, yes, okay, that everything snaps into place. And so I think that's the most essential part of the message, to the degree that what I'm doing has an essential message. That would be it. And I do think that's what accounts for a large part of its impact.